Starfire with writingthroughlife.com. And today, as part of my new series on the writing life, I'm interviewing Dan Bessie, author of My Mother, the Notebook Lady, a new work of creative nonfiction. I met Dan virtually when he contacted me by email and asked me to read his manuscript with an eye to endorsing it. I did, and I found his story both profound and intriguing. Here's a little bit of an excerpt of what I wrote. I'll be reading this. In My Mother, the Notebook Lady, Dan Bessie artfully threads together two compelling narratives into a poignant and moving story. The Notebook Lady is both a memoir of a young boy struggling to survive in the hostile environment of an all-boys boarding school and an intimate portrait of a loving mother climbing her way out of deep depression in order to be reunited with her sons. Tender, compassionate, and deeply moving, My Mother, the Notebook Lady reminds us that the motivating force of love truly can overcome the darkness of emotional trauma and bring healing and light to the future. Before we begin our interview, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dan, who has had a career in the film industry since 1956 when he began working on the Tom and Jerry cartoons at MGM, and then as animator on various TV series for children, including Spider-Man and Marvel superheroes. Wow. From the early 70s on, he wrote and directed educational films for schools and libraries, both live and animated, including 2 films with Ray Bolger, Scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz.
Three films with Ray Bolger.
3, okay. So 3 films with Ray Bolger, and the 2 that I'm highlighting here are Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz and a live version of Peter and Wolf, both featured on CBS. He wrote his first memoir, Rare Birds, An American Family, in 2000. He is also author of Reeling Through Hollywood, a film career memoir, and has now just completed this newest memoir, My Mother, the Notebook Lady. Since 2006, he's lived in southern France. So Dan, I just want to welcome you to Writing Through Life and thank you for indulging me in this rather long-winded introduction. I'd like to begin with some questions about your writing process, if that's okay.
Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm totally delighted to be interviewed by you.
Well, I'm really happy to have you on. So when did you decide to write your mother's story? I mean, what was your personal inciting incident?
Well, initially I started it in the early 90s. My mother had died in 1983, and it was not too long after that I found a huge box of writing that she had done, diaries, memoirs, some creative writing. She'd taken writing classes after her retirement. And I began to think about it, and I tried to put something together that was just all in her own words. But I found that wasn't quite successful. There wasn't enough tie-together material in her own words in order to make it a really comprehensive book. So I just let it go for a while. And then around 2010, I suppose, I picked it up again and started to put it together using a lot of my own memories and those of my brother, because we had gone through a lot of the same things together when we were kids, and began to work better.
Yeah. And I think it works really well. The juxtaposition of your personal memoir, your memories of as a child with her journal entries, it really does complete a story. And that's what actually brought you to me in the first place, was that commonality we had of finding our mother's journals, exactly. and having that be what sort of instigated a writing of a memoir. And I had that same experience. Exactly. So yeah, it's a gift. It's a gift having all of those. So we just talked about that. So with the fact that you were working with her journals, what resources did you use to help bring your own memories and details of that time into focus? Was your brother available to interview? Did you talk to him? What kinds of things did you use?
But I gave the manuscript, the first couple versions of the manuscript to him. I sent them to me. He lives in San Francisco, or near San Francisco. And he made a lot of comments and recalled things that I hadn't recalled. One of the things that he recalled most vividly was the fact that in this boarding school, apparently some of the older boys didn't like me for whatever reason, I don't know. And he just sort of felt that if he buddied up to them, he would be protecting me, which I found very, very touching, very moving. And
Yeah,
so
especially since he's the younger brother, correct?
he's 2.5 years younger than me.
Yeah,
So
so
that became an important ingredient as the story developed.
it did, yes. Okay. And in terms of the process of using your resource materials, your mother's journals, can you describe for us how you went through it, how you decided what to use, what not to use, how to create that voice, her point of view? Just kind of off the cuff
Yeah,
here.
I felt that since she said so much in her writing, and she had exposed a lot of what had happened in her life in her own writing as personal memory. That was what she was doing. That it was I found it fairly easy to integrate. And it was just mainly a question of knowing when to bring her in and knowing when to bring my own voice in. Some things you can go on and on and on, and it can become boring. So I had to kind of decide when a new voice was needed, when I could go back to the place where my brother and I were in the boys' school, when I should go back to my mother. And it's more or less chronological, although it does go back and forth in time. And you just do it by doing it, as you know from being a writer.
I hear that, yeah.
Say, no, this doesn't work. I got to do something different. So you put that aside and you start all over again,
Right, right.
I went through about 5 drafts of the thing before I was happy with it.
Yeah, well, it definitely works because your mother's process is sometimes a bit dreamy. It's very reflective and very internal. And so having the tension of what you were going through in the boys' school and having that thread running throughout and in between woven with your mother's story it keeps the reader turning the page. Works really
Exactly.
well.
She was very introspective. And there's a lot of things that I didn't put in the book. Some things I did put in the book. She's forever writing little notes to herself saying, for example, above all, I must not take myself too seriously, because if I do, all of life's beauties and the people in it will be lost to me. Something on that order. She was always making comments.
That's frame-worthy.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of writing a little book, because she's got so many notes of her own, which are kind of what you might call wise or thoughtful sayings, and putting that out. If the book is accepted by a publisher who's interested in that, I think I might create something of that, because there's a lot of stuff I could use.
Yeah, mother's aphorisms.
So, and just the way she behaved, the things she did in terms of raising us. I think if you don't mind, I cite the thing in the book in which my brother was playing outside our house one day when he was about 15 years old and getting fairly strong for his age. And a kid comes along on the street, and a playmate he was playing with said, "Call that kid a queer, call him a queer." And David said, "Hey, you queer." And the big older boy stopped and shook his finger at him and said, "If you call me that, I'm going to beat the shit out of you, pardon me." And so 15, 20 minutes later, the boy came back, and again, my brother was egged on to say the same thing he did. And the boy started to knock my brother around. My mother came running out of the house and said, "What's going on here? Why are you hurting my son?" And the boy said, "Ma'am, your son called me a queer. I'm not a queer." And my mother said to David, "Did you call him that?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And she turned without a word, she turned right around on her heel, walked back in the house, and let the boy continue to pummel my brother.
And he probably didn't even know what it meant, no?
No, exactly not. Exactly. No, but
Yeah.
that's the kind of person she was. She taught by experience. By one of my things my brother said at the end of the book, when I said, I asked him, I said, what did Mom say that was so valuable to you as we were growing up? And he said, "Well, she never really said that much. It was her example, the way she behaved, that I learned from." And I found that very moving also.
Yeah. She sounds like an amazing woman.
She was indeed.
As as a writer, I mean, obviously you've been, with your experience in the movie industry, your exposure to all kinds of storytelling over the years, and then of course in the 90s beginning to write memoir. What would you say you have gained as a writer through the process of writing Notebook Lady that might be different than your earlier memoirs?
Oh my goodness.
I know, loaded question. Huh?
Well, I think that, I guess my attitude towards life itself, I just start there, is that life is really continual learning process. If you're not self-absorbed and egotistical like some people, you continue to learn, you continue to grow, and when you come to the end of life, you still want to be learning, as far as I'm concerned. So, as part of the writing process, I kind of try to look at my own writing and see, is this the best way to say something? Can I say it better? And I look back at stuff I've written earlier and I said, oh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? So it's mainly just a continual learning process that interests me as a writer. And I think that that's a valuable lesson that anybody can take on and find that they grow with it.
Okay, thank you. I agree. And of course, now you're in the process, you finished your manuscript, and I know you still have some editing and things to do with, but you're in the process of looking for an agent and a publisher. So I had asked you before in an email, who is your intended audience for this manuscript?
The first audience would be, I think, women who have gone through or are going through depression, and anyone who has been supportive of them in that process, friends, family, relatives, because everybody needs some kind of guidance. And I think a book like this can be very helpful to see what the experience of one individual was and learn from that and perhaps apply it to their own circumstances in some sense. And I think that it serves that purpose. Frankly, if it only reaches 20 people, I'll be happy. I mean, I would like it to go beyond that, but I think that will give me gratification, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest purposes of memoirs, that shared universal experiences that we have. And when we read about other people who go through them and the various ways they cope, the various ways they overcome, it's always hopeful, and it always provides something for the readers. And I definitely think that in addition to kind of a process or a shared story about people who've experienced depression, I think children of people who've had depression also, it works well for that too, because here you are, this young boy, and you're going through this. And the story, I think, is as much about you as it is about your mother. You know what I mean? You really weave those two together very well.
I tried to make it that way. Did you ever read a book called Growing Up by Russell Baker?
No, I haven't.
Russell Baker was reporter for the New York Times, for the Baltimore host of Masterpiece Theater for a long time. He wrote a book called Growing Up, and he sent it to his publisher, and he didn't hear from the publisher for 3 months. Now, this is a guy who's very famous. He finally wrote to the publishers, "Didn't you like the book?" He says, "Well, it's all about you and how you became a journalist." He says, "That's not the way to start the book. The book is about your mother. Tell us about the people who influenced you. What did you get out of what they taught you? What you learned from them?" And so the book starts with his mother now, and it is a marvelous description of the kind of person she was. I suggest everybody read Growing Up. It's a wonderful
book. I'm going to make a note. That sounds good. I'll add it to my long list of to reads. But no, definitely that sounds good.
So Thank you. So many books, so little time.
Right.
I think that we all can learn by reading great writing, and bad writing too. I read bad writing sometimes.
Oh, want to. Definitely. Definitely. I really encourage all my readers and, of the writingthroughlife.com blog and everyone I know to take some time to analyze the books you're reading, especially if something in it doesn't work, and if you're pulled out of the story and you're kind of trying to figure it out, it's a good time to look at it and say, what did this writer do here that didn't work? I don't want to do that.
It did work. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did work?
There's an old saying in screenwriting. It's kind of a black saying, but you come across something that you've written in a screenplay and it doesn't work. It slows down the story. It doesn't advance things. And the saying is, you have to kill your children.
Okay. Yeah.
Your children sometimes are your writing ideas, of course, in that sense.
Right.
And
yeah. The things we
love that
think
piece of writing, but it has to go.
Right. We think we've done something really marvelous, but in truth, it doesn't fit in some way. And so we have to let it go.
Hard decisions like that way.
They call it ruthless editing.
My father's cousin was a publisher. He published with Harper and Row. He was one of their editors for a long time. And I've forgotten the name of the author, one of the guys who he was working with to edit a book. And they went on a boat down in Florida and worked together for 3 weeks or something. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. And the author called him up finally and said, Michael, I solved the problem. I cut out the first third of the book.
Yeah, sometimes it takes that much or that drastic of a step, but
Right.
Definitely. That's hilarious.
Hard
So
lesson to learn, but
if you have, because you've had a very successful career and as you mentioned, even when books may or may not sell a lot, if you have a few readers that they touch, it's a successful story, it's a successful book. I'm interested in words of wisdom you might have for those who are viewing this interview as a writer, what you might, anything else that you might have to say that would be of interest.
oh my goodness, you cut me to the quick. What am I going to say about that? I don't know what to say except keep reading. Keep reading what other people say. And I think you put your finger on it. Why did what they write in the way they wrote it touch me? Why did it reach me? And why did this particular chapter, paragraph, sentence, whatever, just not do anything for me? Because everything that a writer writes should somehow advance the story, it seems to me. And if it doesn't advance the story, you got to question it. You got to say to yourself, am I just being self-indulgent? I mean, I'm reading a book about a guy's growing up in India now. It's won all kinds of wonderful prizes, and it's a very well-written book. But he keeps digressing all the time. I mean, do you ever read Moby Dick, for example?
Yeah.
I don't care. I want to hear the story, but I don't care about the whaling parts and how they're
Right.
doing.
I know sometimes books will start diving into a lot of technical details that aren't, like you say, they don't move the story forward.
That's right. They're interesting from a historical point of view and the minutiae, but sometimes they just, okay, get on with the next chapter, please.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Dan.
Hard on yourself, gentle but hard on yourself at the same time.
That's very good advice and hard to do. And yet that being, I think it's recognizing that it's all a process, right?
It is a process. It's a process. And I think the more that you can be honest with yourself and have a lot of insight into your own mind and the way it works and what you're doing, whether you're being self-indulgent, whether you're being egotistical, whether you're just talking to talk, or whether you're talking to reach people, I think that's kind of a way to approach your own writing.
Great. Thank you. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure getting a chance to meet you face to face finally after all this time and to speak with you today. I want to thank you, and we'll have this will be posted in January of 2018, and I look forward to seeing that up and sharing your story with our readers.
You're most kind, and I thank you.